Hello again. My name is Raymond Ervin Cain Jr. That's Raymond Cain. And I welcome you back to the Institute's virtual presence and to part three of our series entitled The Choice is Yours. We are always grateful that you share this time with us, especially when we consider there are other places you can be and you can be doing other things. If you just happen to stumble across us accidentally, please know that it is not a mistake. As I always say, nothing happens by happenstance, nor are there any coincidences in the universe. Spirit brought you here. I really believe that. And Spirit wants you to share in this learning experience. So stick around for a while, particularly if you feel disenfranchised by your current religious experience, have a yearning, dare I say, a thirst for righteousness, or if you are just interested in learning new approaches to religiosity and spirituality. For all of these reasons, you're in the right place. But first, let us review the 4 points of this series. The first point was choice is the center or the engine or the driver of the evolutionary process. This was part two of the study. Today, we're going to talk about choice as it implies and requires a high degree of consciousness. Point three is choice has consequences. And number four, choice is spiritual. And that's a correction to the last time I mentioned this point. It should have been choice is spiritual. So change that in your notes. Choice is spiritual. Set your affections on things eternal. Today we will consider the second point of the lesson. Again, choice implies and requires a high degree of consciousness. According to Eckhart Tolle, in his #1 New York Times bestseller, The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment, he says, choice implies consciousness, a high degree of consciousness. Without it, you have no choice. Choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns, the moment you become present. Until you reach that point, you are unconscious. You're asleep, spiritually speaking. Additionally, Tolle posits, if mental development and increased knowledge are not counterbalanced by a corresponding growth in consciousness, the potential for unhappiness and disaster is very great. His point, very simple. Choice, choice, choice implies consciousness, a high degree of consciousness. Now, you know, we looked at consciousness in the introduction to this series, which was part one. We looked at consciousness, and I took a modicum of time to sort of try to explain it in short terms. It's a very complex subject, and thousands of pages have been written on consciousness, and there's actually studies going on now that are looking at consciousness and exactly what it is. It's a lot going on in this area of consciousness, but nevertheless, we went through that, and so we'll just do a little bit more going through consciousness as we go through this point two. Choice implies and requires a high degree of consciousness. Again, Eckhart Tolle, who is a master, he's a genius, and if you can ever get a hold of any of his books, you just have to get them because they will take you to a higher level after each reading. His main point is choice implies consciousness, a high degree of consciousness. Without it, you have no choice. Another author, Zukov, who I presented to you in the last lesson, says that when you enter your decision making dynamic consciously, you enter consciously into your own evolution. And remember, we said that evolution is just maturity and growth. We don't mean evolution in the Darwinian sense. Each time you create with the intention of the soul, be it forgiveness, humbleness, clarity, and love, you empower yourself. This is how authentic power is built up. Zukov says step by step and choice by choice. Richard Blackstone, in his book Nuts and Bolts of Spirituality, Waking Up the Sleepwalker, writes, many of us live in a world in which we feel we have no control, a world where people live lives of quiet desperation. But what if you lived in a world where you could have whatsoever you desired? A world where people live lives of active manifestation. Well, we live in that world now. It's the same world for both concepts, separation and oneness. The difference is how you choose to create your life. The difference is how you choose to create your life. When you create your life unconsciously, or when you're cognitively asleep, you can easily fall into the trap of quiet desperation. When you create your life consciously, you cannot help but live a life of active manifestation. What does that mean? The desires of your heart are fulfilled. God says in the scriptures, I will fulfill the desires of your heart. This is active manifestation. Many metaphysicians see mind as a tripartite enterprise, and this is a review: conscious mind, subconscious mind, and superconscious mind. Remember that unconsciousness is cognitive sleep, psychological sleep. We're out of it. Conscious mind or cognitive awareness is the processing center of humankind and is given to the movement of ideas, which we commonly term thinking. Thinking is the movement of ideas in consciousness. Subconscious mind, which is subjective consciousness, is that aspect of being that stores thoughts and events of the past. The superconscious mind, which is causal consciousness and Christ consciousness, or some say spiritual consciousness, is that state of consciousness that is based upon true ideas, upon an understanding and realization of spiritual truth. And that's according to Fillmore in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Now, these distinctions are important because they are the sources from which we draw information relative to our choices. For example, if we operate from the conscious phase of mind, we are limited to what the five physical senses tell us. While it is possible to stumble across an appropriate choice for the situation at hand, these cues from the conscious mind can be very deceiving. The fact is, our awareness of situations often differs from what they seem and is far removed from reality. When we choose from the knowledge available at the subconscious level, we may access past experiences that may have yielded successful results and positive outcomes. Let me repeat that. When we choose from the knowledge available at the subconscious level of mind, we can access past experiences that may have yielded successful results and positive outcomes. We can use these recollections as sources for current situations. However, however, we can also draw from memories that are not positive and thus rely on flawed assumptions and misinformation to make appropriate choices. So, choices made from data stored in memory may not be reliable. However, what state or what phase of consciousness must we rely upon for effective execution of choice? Fillmore concludes, that's Charles Fillmore, man merges his consciousness with the absolute through harmonizing all of his ideas with the unlimited ideals of the Christ mind or superconsciousness. This is accomplished by his understanding divine mind and its laws. The necessary spiritual food the necessary food for spiritual man is the Word of God. And in this case, we're talking about the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Scriptures. Without it, there is no sustenance for spiritual consciousness, and soul and body perish with hunger. So we can conclude, as did Blackstone, who says, only in awareness can you fully realize and recognize who you are. Only living consciously and deliberately can you make the choices that keep your life on course, steering in the direction that you desire. Only by being consciously aware can you even determine what you desire. Only your being consciously aware can you even determine what you desire. Only your personal awareness lets you know when you lose focus and allows you to clear the lenses of your perceptions and adjust the course of your life. So going back, let's remember the discussion we had on consciousness. Remember that we said that you can be consciously unaware. And that's the thing that we have to try to avoid. Let me go back to my notes and do this. Let me review this whole issue of consciousness because it's so important to our growth and spiritual development. Remember that we said that there are 4 states or phases of mind. And I'm counting in the 4 unconsciousness. Most people would argue that there's only 3 phases of mind, and that would be the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. Now, remember I said that the unconscious state of mind is cognitive sleep. We are in a state of unconscious awareness, which simply means we don't know that we don't know. It is in the arena of, excuse the pun, stinking thinking. And that's not original to Raymond. That's quite common in New Thought thinking, thinking. Unfortunately, too many of us operate in this state of psychological sleep. This is also the realm of the earth where our focus is on our animalistic tendencies. Now, remember we talked about the conscious phase of mind. The conscious phase of mind is the body of the mind, if you will. The conscious uh, phase of mind is that aspect of being that is closest to the earth and the ego. It responds to prompts from the 5 physical senses: sight, sound, hearing, touch, and smell. At this juncture, we are in a state of conscious unawareness. In essence, we know that we don't know, and we may or may not be doing anything about it. This is the point where we make the choice of moving forward and correcting our errors in thinking or remaining where we are cognitively, possibly even slipping backwards. So that's the conscious phase of mind, the body of the mind, if you will. The subconscious is the province of the soul. It is the repository of all of our memories and experiences. Herein resides the wheel of karma and the Akashic records. At this state, we are consciously aware and we know that we know. We've made a deliberate effort to know what we need to know. And we may have made the choice to move up through its states or its phases, which is emotional, lower astral, higher astral, and mental. I told you this is complex, so we will have a separate study that deals with these things individually. Just just need to know for today that it's in the subconscious province of mind that the soul resides, and it is the repository of all of our memories and experiences. It's in the subconscious that we plant seeds of thought and where they can be nourished and consequently bring forth good fruit. That's the subconscious. Between the subconscious and the superconscious, and we'll get to the superconscious next, resides the heart or human spiritual center. It represents the feeling nature, the source of inspiration and intuition. This demarcation is also known in the scriptures as the dome, the firmament, and Jesus called it a chasm or chasm, whichever you prefer. It is also the line that separates soul consciousness and spirit consciousness. This is not, however, a solid line where one thing happens on one side of the line and something else happens on the other side of the line. Rather, it's a region. And at this region, those seeds planted in the subconscious take root and begin to sprout. This applies to all divisions of the consciousness that we talk about. All of the boundaries between um, unconsciousness, consciousness, subconsciousness, and we'll get to the superconsciousness next. They're all of the boundaries are malleable and permeable. Each state of consciousness in reality interacts with the others. There's a systems thing going on, if you will. Now, the superconscious is reserved for the few that attain it. That's what I have in my notes. The few that attain it. It consists of the causal phase of mind and the Christ consciousness. The impossible with man, but possible with God, takes place here in the super consciousness. Miracles take place here. What's a miracle? Nothing but a perfect outworking of the law. This is the way it's supposed to work. So we call it a miracle when things work the way they're supposed to work. Um, Christ consciousness transcends all earthly phenomena. And it was interesting, and I'm using the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures in this particular study. There are other sacred writings that I refer to from time to time. It's just I have a love for the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures because that's what I was raised with and that's what I know the best. So I stick with what I know, or at least what I'm learning. What I'm learning. Um, but Yeshua attained this state of consciousness when he said in John 10, verse 30, the Father and I are one. And I told you in the last lesson, oh, if we were just to get to that place where we could recognize that there's nothing but God. God is the God of the universe. And there's nothing else. There's nothing else. Everything else is an idea that was in the mind of God that has found expression through spirit, through the activity of God, which is spirit. Think of this, and I'm going off track here just a little bit. Think of this. The universe has no end. It goes in all directions. Therefore, if God is the God of the universe, then God must not have an end or edges, if you will. There's no start and beginning of God. And that's hard for us to conceptualize as humans. Our minds are not like the mind of God in that regard. We put a time stamp on everything, and we put a distance stamp on everything. But in the universe, there is no time, there is no distance, there's nothing but space. So, this God is one. Universe is the word that we use to describe everything we know about nature, if I can call it that. It's everything we know about nature. And uni means what? One. So there's one verse, universe, one. Jesus realized that. And I like to call him Yeshua because that was his name in Hebrew. If we called him Jesus today, if he came back and we called him Jesus, he probably wouldn't know who you were talking to, because Jesus is a transliteration of the Greek. But that's another story. That's not really important. Um, he recognized that there was just one. Oh, what a wonderful world it would be if we could all get to the place where we recognize that we are all just one. We're one with another. We're one with all creation. We're uh, uh, um, one with the universe. We're one with God. When we can recognize that, we have transcended all earthly phenomena. Now, this is the state, superconscious. Let me get back on track here. This is the state of all knowing. We are unconsciously aware. What does that mean? We do things by habit. That's the best word in English we have. We have internalized the word, we have internalized God to the point that awareness just happens. It just happens. And a point I was going to make before was, remember that Jesus used to call out the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees. He used to call them out all the time, and he knew what they were thinking. He knew what they were thinking. And he, knowing what they were thinking in his heart, would respond even before they could attack him. And that's what made them so angry, because he knew what was in their hearts. When we are one with God, we can read each other's spirit. Doesn't the scripture say, try the spirits to see whether they're of God? We are able to try these different entities that are misconcepts. They're untruths. They really aren't real, if I can say that. They're not real. They're just things that have been conjured up in minds that are, Paul calls them retrograde. So when we live from the superconscious part of our lives, and again, the few that attain it are sort of an elite bunch. God has no respecter of person. He has no favorites, but they're sort of an elite bunch, and we usually follow them in terms of our religiosity. Well, that's what we have to say about consciousness, and I've spent a lot of time on the superconscious. But there is one more thing that I would like to talk about, uh, and and it's the word few. Don't don't be dissuaded because of the word few. There's one a Christian group that believes in predestination, and they believe that there's just so many people that are quote unquote saved, whatever that means. There's only so many people that are going to make it into heaven, whatever that means, and that the rest of us are just lost for eternity. Uh, don't be troubled by the notion of a few that achieve super consciousness. Remember what I said. All of these phases of mind interact with and among each other and one another. So while we're operating, even in sleep, even in sleep, the subconscious talks to us and tells us things in dreams that we otherwise wouldn't catch when we're awake. Awake. So that's why it's so important to keep a pen and pencil by your bedside at night. So when you have certain dreams, you can record those dreams. And there's uh, those of us, and I don't claim to be one of those, uh, but we can actually look at those dreams and interpret them. Remember that God spoke to the prophets. God spoke even in the Christian scriptures or so-called New Testament. He spoke in dreams and in visions. In dreams and in visions. What's the difference between a vision and a dream? A dream is when we're asleep. A vision is when we're woke. Well, we've gotten to the end of this section on choice implies and requires a high degree of consciousness. Uh, the next section will be it's actually point number 3, choice has consequences. That's a pretty long one, so we may have to divide that up into 2 or 3 parts, but that's what we'll be talking about next. And I want to thank you so much for sharing with us uh, at this time.